For Zimbabweans, corruption in the public sector has made the most mundane of civic activities, like getting a driver's license or installing an electricity meter, very, very difficult. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has admitted that corruption among cabinet ministers in particular is problematic, but he says he lacks the evidence to prosecute. But his government has cracked down on dissent and public protests, and in fact is currently considering a bill that would criminalize criticism of the country and its leaders. The patriotic bill is what it's being called, and it's been slammed by human rights and pro-democracy activists who say, if passed, will further shrink the country's democratic space. Human rights lawyer Doug Coulthard joins us now from Harare in Zimbabwe. Doug, I mean, it's almost unthinkable, this thing called a patriotic act, which does, on the face of it, the exact opposite thing.
Precisely. It is among the most unpatriotic things that a parliament can do, to pass an act which would essentially prevent or criminalize any citizen from raising virtually any criticism about the way that things are run, about corruption, about things that we believe our country can improve it. And by doing so, you are saying that there is no room for improvement. That this is where it's at. This is as far as we can come. We can't get any better, because if citizens are not able to speak out and point out things that need to be addressed, then we're not going to get anywhere.
I mean, one could argue, Doug, that this act is actually already in effect, given how those who do protest against, for example, the meager wages in the healthcare sector, the pittance that educators and teachers earn in Zimbabwe, if they protest that, the treatment that they get in return.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, in a sense, there's nothing new here. The criminalization of any form of dissent or even, as you say, legitimate labor disputes. The criminal code has been used in that way. Things such as inciting public violence or participating in a gathering with intent to cause public violence are offences that have been used to criminalize any form of dissent, even when there is absolutely no public violence incited whatsoever. We have cases coming through the pipeline now of people who were arrested for holding signs saying "respect our constitution," and are being prosecuted for inciting public violence on that basis. So to that degree, you're absolutely right. The criminal law is being used to prosecute anyone and everyone. I think the purpose of this Patriotic Act is really just to absolutely close every loophole for any form of dissent. And if there happens to be an independently minded magistrate who receives one of these absurd cases, one of the inciting public violence cases, for instance, and decides to acquit, which is, of course, what the regime does not want. This Patriotic Act essentially closes that hole, because now you have criminalized absolutely every form of dissent.
Sure. I mean, Doug, I think for the sake of our viewers, it's important for you to outline the kind of treatment that people who try to stand up to the government in Zimbabwe or just try to fight for better wages. I mean, we're hearing stories of abduction. We're hearing stories of people being prosecuted and viciously suppressed. Tell us some of the stories that you're able to.
Yeah, the atrocities which are being perpetrated are horrific. Just tomorrow, I'm going to court with two clients who were participating or who were literally just walking around their neighborhood on the 31st of July last year, holding a sign saying "Respect the Constitution, no to abductions." Those two young gentlemen were picked up, abducted, taken out of the city, brutally tortured for hours before eventually being taken to the police station. No one had any idea where they were for hours and hours and hours. I was searching from police station to police station, trying to find them. And eventually, when we tracked them down, they were in a very bad state. And this is not an isolated case. There are scores of instances where people have been abducted and brutally tortured, sometimes tortured to death, and sometimes discovered only months later, their body decomposing in a mortuary. These are the realities of anyone who tries to speak out against this very brutal authoritarian regime.
Yeah, and that's just one incident you're telling us about. Doug, are you surprised that we're here 4 years after Emmerson Mnangagwa took over in Zimbabwe? I mean, I remember his inauguration so vividly, and that sense of hope that this was going to be a new future for Zimbabwe.
Yeah, certainly. At that time, there was an immense amount of goodwill given towards him and to those who promised at that stage to turn things around and do things differently to how they had been done in the Mugabe era and in the colonial era before that, where brutal oppression was used to maintain a tight-knit group of people who extract resources. There was hope, but I think those of us who have followed the career of Emmerson Mnangagwa for some time were very skeptical, and this is someone who has been involved in many of the worst atrocities that our nation has seen, going back to the Kukuruhundi genocide in the 1980s. And so to that degree, it did look, even from the early stages, like a mere changing of the guards. Of course, you have to cling on to hope, but those hopes have been dashed.
Dashed to the point of a worse reality before Emmerson Mnangagwa, a worse reality than even Robert Mugabe?
Well, I think it's really has been a continuum, and I think we really have to see them as one continuous regime. Any talk of a new dispensation or a second republic is really nonsense. It's the same players who are perpetrating the same atrocities. That regime has been through. There have been through periods of heightened repression and periods which have seen more openness. And right now we are going through a period of heightened repression. So I would say the oppression that we are seeing now under Emmerson Mnangagwa is probably worse than perhaps the last decade of Mugabe's rule. But of course we need to see Mugabe's rule in the context of the brutality of the 2008 election, the atrocities of the early 2000s and of the 80s that we spoke about. So to say one is worse or one is better, I think is a difficult one. I think what's more accurate is to say that this is a brutal regime which has reinvented itself.
Doug, you've described to us the brutalities against people who dare speak out against the Zimbabwean government, activists like yourself. And I'm sure you're speaking to us now as well, at least to some great risk to yourself and to your family. How do you continue to do the work that you do in that environment?
Yeah, there are certainly real risks which you need to take into account, and I do what I can to try and mitigate those risks. I think for me, I'm driven by a vision of the Zimbabwe that I dream of, the Zimbabwe that I want my children to grow up in. This is our home, and we want to see a Zimbabwe where people can flourish and where their rights are respected. I think for me personally, I'm very grounded in my faith. And that is a source of strength for me when I feel under siege. And I think that's the case for many others as well. But ultimately, we can't be deterred by threats, because if we do, we'll never attain the Zimbabwe that we want.
Doug, just a final comment from you. I'm just looking at my Twitter timeline, and our own President Cyril Ramaphosa's birthday wish to who he called my friend. He says, a very happy birthday to my friend. And this is Emmerson Mnangagwa talking to Cyril Ramaphosa. When we think about diplomacy, we understand that each country is sovereign and can make its own decisions to that degree. But what do you think should have been or should be the kinds of pressure that other countries on the continent are putting on Zimbabwe?
Yeah, I think that South Africa in particular and Africa in more broadly can play a very critical role in resolving this very protracted crisis in Zimbabwe. These are the countries that have real influence on Zimbabwe. South Africa is by far Zimbabwe's largest trading partner and has those historic ties. And I think certainly as Zimbabweans, we would really yearn for the day where we do see African leaders who stand up for the Zimbabwean people, and actually draw a line in the sand and say this far and no further, and actually what the Zimbabwe government is doing to its own people is not right, and that as Africans we need to stand together as Africans, not merely as leaders who look out to protect each other, but really who should be at the center of any decision making should be the people of any nation.
Doug Coltart, as always, thanks very much for talking to us here on the AM Report. He is a human rights lawyer, and he's talking to us about the so-called patriotic bill in Zimbabwe, slammed by people like Doug for the risk of further shrinking the already small democratic space in that country.